I want you to think back through your life at the teachers that you have had in your life, specifically those who taught you about Jesus Christ, about salvation, and about the changes that need to take place in your life. Now, I'm sure that you had some bad teachers as well as some good teachers. You know, a good teacher, a bad teacher is still a good thing, because the bad teachers teach you how not to be, while the good teachers teach you how to be. But I want you to think about how you feel about those people in your life. I would bet that the people who shared Jesus Christ with you, and they are people who are important to you, valuable to you, you respect them, you look up to them. Well, there's a certain amount of responsibility that goes along with being a teacher. In the book of James, the 3rd chapter, the 1st verse, it says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we all shall receive a greater or stricter judgment." Now, with that in mind, everybody's a teacher. You're all teachers, because you're teaching somebody around you this morning. You're teaching them about your life. You're teaching them about your relationship to the Lord. You're teaching them how they should be. So everybody's a teacher. But the teachers that are being talked about here are specifically people who have accepted the position of teacher. And they're those who are involved in teaching others about their walk with Christ. Now, going back to the book of Ezekiel, God said to Ezekiel, "I have made you a watchman, and therefore I want you to speak to the wicked, and I want you to tell the wicked that if they don't change, they're going to die in their sin." Okay, and then he says, if you do tell them, and they still don't do anything, and they die, their blood is on their head. But if you don't tell them, and they die, their blood is on your head. See, I think that's the principle that's given to us in the Old Testament, is carried over into the New. Because there's a certain amount of responsibility that you take upon yourself when you become a teacher. You're teaching people not just by the words that you use, but by then how you act. You teach people about love, and you tell them about respect, and you tell them about self-sacrifice. And then you go out into the parking lot, and somebody's parked so close to your car that you can't get into it, and you throw a little temper tantrum, and you come back in here, and you want to know who that person was that parks next to you, because you can't get out. It's kind of hard to tell people about love and then act in an unloving way, because by your action, you've told them that this is acceptable, this is okay. Well, they're confused. They already know about that kind of love. And so the responsibility upon teachers is to make sure that you're directing people towards God. You're directing people towards salvation. You're directing them into a better walk with God. All right, let's continue on there in the 2nd verse. "For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body." Well, now we know there's no perfect people here, and it doesn't really mean perfect. What it means is mature, experienced. You've grown up in the Lord, and you're to a place in your life to where you can control your tongue. All right, in the 1st chapter, he told us about how we were supposed to be patient in trouble. The 2nd chapter, he told us about practicing the truth. The 3rd chapter, he's talking about controlling the tongue. And controlling the tongue, then, has to do with different parts, different comparisons here in this chapter. He's going to compare, in the first one, we have the ability to direct people's lives by the tongue. In verse 3, it says, "Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships, although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires." Now, obviously, the bit in a horse's mouth that's trained, and the rider who is trained and knows how to use the bit can accomplish a lot of things with the horse. And so it is with us as people. We can accomplish a lot of things with our mouths, but one way or the other, we're either going to direct people to good or we're going to direct people to bad. Oftentimes, we don't see the difference between the two, and that's what gets us into trouble. So then he talks about ships, and aircraft carriers, they're the same as every other ship. They have a rudder that is steered, and the helmsman is going to make sure that the boat goes the way it's supposed to go. So in reality, in both these instances, it's about control, and it's about direction, and making sure that we're headed in the right direction, doing the right kinds of things. Whether it's by a bit or whether it's by a rudder, there is control there. And so the person who is doing the control is obviously a master at what he does. So in our lives, we become masters of our tongue to make sure that our tongue is being directed in the way that it should go, making sure that our words are being directed to somebody else to direct them in the way that they should go. So it's very pointed. He goes on, the second one here. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. Now, Mike Mitchell and I used to go hunting over at Jackson, and we took MREs with us, very easy to take and put in the pack, and we would get up on top of a mountain, and I'm hungry, and I'm not really all that particular about it. So Mike, he would have to start a fire, and he would get his fire going, and he'd get his water going, and he'd put his MRE in there, and he'd warm it up. Well, by the time that he was ready to eat his MRE, I was already taking a nap. But fire does serve a valuable purpose. If it's 20 below zero and you're outside and you're cold, a fire is a very good thing. So a fire can be really neat to sit around a campfire and look at and watch and dream and all of that. But there's also another part of the fire that is not so really cool and neat. In October 8th, 1871, the O'Leary barn in Chicago caught on fire, and it spread very quickly. At the end of the fire, 100,000 people were homeless, 17,500 buildings were destroyed, and cost the city $400 million. And that was in 1871. So fire can be really good, and then it can be really bad. Do you see the comparison to our mouths? Our mouths can be really good. They can be really pleasant. Things can come out of them that are healthy and healing and lift people up, or we can be very destructive. The first part of it was the ability to direct. The second part of it is the ability to destroy. With our mouths, we can destroy other people's lives. A person during the coffee hour said, "There's been more throats slit by a tongue than by a knife." I think there's probably some truth to that. A tongue can be something that is like a fire. It can be used for good, and it can be used for bad. He goes on, verse 6, "And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body, and sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison." Doesn't that make you want to rip that thing right out of there? And during the coffee hour, one of the guys who was here in the first service went around like this, wouldn't talk to anybody because he didn't want his tongue to be on display and say things that he shouldn't. Well, with the beasts part here, talking about animals and the taming of the animals, you can tame animals. Everybody can tame animals, except in the process of this, you can't tame your own tongue. You want to. You don't want to say hurtful things. You don't want to say damaging things, but you can't control it. Nobody can control it. Goes on, verse 9, "With it we bless God and Father, and with it we curse men, who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be." In the book of 1 John, we can draw the principle, if you want to know how much you love God, take a look at how much you love the person you like the least, and you'll know of your love relationship to God. And he draws that same conclusion here. How can you bless God and then curse man who are created in God's image? Because God did the creating, so if you got a problem with man, you got a problem with the Creator. The curses that you're offering back to man are going right to the Heavenly Father as well. And he says very pointedly, these things ought not so to be. It shouldn't be this way. Okay, now the next one is the ability to delight. He goes on, "Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring can yield both salt water and fresh." All right, we know that to be true. You can't have salt water and fresh water coming out of the same place. It just doesn't work that way. And yet that's what happens in our mouth. When we bless God and curse man, we have two things coming out of our mouth at the same time. There was a fellow who had a coworker, and he was working with the guy, and he took a hammer and he smashed his thumb, and out of his mouth came all sorts of cursing. And the guy knew that he was a Christian. So the guy who smashed his thumb turned around to the other guy and he says, I don't know what just came over me. That is not me. And his coworker looked at him and he said, well, if that's not you, who was it? Really have to take a look at these things. So you can't have both. You can't have good water and you can't have salt water coming forth from the same place. You know, the Bible says much about words and the tongue. In the book of Proverbs, the 18th chapter, verse 21, it says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. That's a pretty important saying, don't you think? Life and death is in the tongue, the power of the tongue. I want to share with you a story. Edward Kimball went into a shoe store in Boston, April 21st, 1855, and he led a young man to Christ by sharing his testimony and sharing the plan of salvation. That man was Dwight L. Moody. And if you've been anywhere, you've heard of Dwight L. Moody and the power and the impact that he had on the American culture, especially concerning Christianity. Well, life and death is in the tongue. Life and death is what we do with the tongue. We're either dealing out life to someone or we're dealing out death to someone. Have you thought about today how you've used your tongue? Was your tongue to bring life and make people's life better? Or was your tongue not? Was it a tongue of death to bring destruction upon people? Because there doesn't seem to be anywhere in between. We're either doing one or the other. In the book of Proverbs again, the 12th chapter, verse 18, it says, there is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. The tongue of the wise promotes health. Well, here's the problem with us as people. You use words often enough, pretty soon you don't have to think about using them anymore, you just use them. But the time and the situation that you use them is really important. And so if you're mindlessly going through life and saying things just because you can say things, there's going to be a time and a situation that's not going to be inappropriate, and you're going to say things that are not helpful, not healing, but are very hurtful, very damaging in a person's life. 22nd verse of the same chapter says, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are His delight. Well, the reason that this is in here is because we know from the New Testament that Satan is the father of all lies, and he is the great deceiver. And so when I tell a lie, I've given permission for him to dwell in my life. And that's an abomination to the Lord. So what he says is being truthful is a delight to the Lord, the decision of whether to tell the truth or to tell a lie. Now, you don't have to be very far into any television program before you're going to see lying taking place, and people are going to laugh at it. That's what made Seinfeld what it was. The sarcasm, the innuendo, the lying that took place, it was cute and people laughed at it. You know what happens when you laugh at something that is sinful? Pretty soon you get to a place of accepting it as being okay. And if you accept it as being okay on the TV screen, it's just one step away from it becoming okay in your life. And then Satan has had a victory because you don't see anything wrong with lying, and that's an abomination before the Lord. So the use of the tongue is of vital importance. Psalms 141, verses 2 and 3. Let my prayer be set before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Now that's a prayer that all of us ought to be praying. David was smart enough to have figured out that he needs the Lord to do this in his life. Why? Well, because in Psalms 39, verses 1 through 3, we find the answer. This is another Psalm of David. It says, I said, I will guard my ways, lest I sin with my tongue. I will restrain my mouth with a muzzle, while the wicked are before me. I was mute with silence. I held my peace, even from good, and my sorrow was stirred up. My heart was hot within me while I was musing. The fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. Now, at first, you look at that, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, I'll bet almost everybody here at some time or another has said, I am not going to say it, I'm not going to say it, I'm not going to say it, and then spew, you said it. You know, when you're angry and you're upset, you know you shouldn't say anything, you know you shouldn't let the words fly out of your mouth, and so I'm not going to, and yes, you did, because no man can tame the tongue. No man can control the tongue. David said that he was gonna, but he couldn't. That's why in Psalm 141, later in his life, he said, Lord, you guard my tongue. Take the doors of my lips and shut them. Why? Because he knew he couldn't. And all of us are the same way. What is being demonstrated when we speak in anger is the lack of the Lord's presence. What's being demonstrated when we criticize, abuse with our mouths? The lack of the Lord's presence. The lack of the Lord working in our life. So all of us are going to have words coming out of our mouth that are health and healing or not, hurting and damaging somebody else's life. One way or the other, that's the way that it's going to be. In the book of Proverbs again, 10th chapter, verse 19, in the multitude of words sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. In the multitude of words. Okay, we talked about that just a little bit ago, about how when you get together for fellowship time, aren't you supposed to talk? And what are you supposed to talk about? Well, you know, we typically talk about the weather, or we talk about things that are going on around us, or things coming up, or things we've been to times past. In other words, you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. You just kind of put it in idle, and you kick it into gear, and then it just happens, and you talk. In the multitude of words, no sin is lacking. What's that look like? Well, it looks like when you say something to somebody that is not helpful but hurting, then you've done damage to the relationship and to the other person. You've steered them in a direction away from God. And maybe it would be better if we didn't talk so much. Maybe it would be better if we concentrated on what we were going to say. If we thought before we spoke. You know, after you've used words often enough, you don't have to think anymore, you just use them. That's where the problem comes in. In the multitude of words, there is no lacking of sin. Because we didn't think about what we were going to say. We didn't ask the Lord what we should say. We didn't consider what the other person was saying to us in return. In the multitude of words, there is no lacking of sin. And then in the 15th chapter, verses 1 through 4, it says, a soft answer turns away wrath. Now, you know how the game is played. If I get angry with you, you're going to get angry with me. You get angry with me, I'm going to get angry with you. And my angry response to your anger is going to make you more angry, and your angry response to my angry response is going to make me more angry. That's the way this works, because that's human nature. If you punch me, I'm going to punch you. But what he says is so foreign to our human nature, and it's contrary to what we think we can do. It says, a soft answer turns away wrath. Somebody who is angry needs somebody to play with who's going to be angry as well in order to vent their anger. But they don't have to deal with it. They can vent their anger if you're going to give them an opportunity to do that. So a soft answer to an angry person makes them responsible for their own anger. And now they have to deal with their anger, and they have to deal with the fact that you're not angry. And it causes them to think about where they're at. But a harsh word stirs up anger. You know that. Whenever somebody snaps your head off, you know it stirs up anger, and you snapping their head off back is going to just stir the pot even that much more. Verse 2, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. There have been a lot of people through the years that says, you know, where is God? Why isn't God doing something about all the evil that is in the world? God watches evil and watches good, and in the end will take the balances of scales and make sure that they're what they should be. The eyes of the Lord are in every place. Verse 4, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life. Oftentimes in the Scripture, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, we see the comparison between vegetation and us. You know, in the first Psalm it says, a righteous person is going to be like a tree planted by living waters. It's going to grow and bear fruit. So we're compared to a tree of life. We're compared to things that are growing and producing fruit. And so he says to us, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life. What is a wholesome tongue? Well, I would suspect that a wholesome tongue is the result of somebody dwelling on purity and holiness. dwelling on God, dwelling on things that are good report, of value, dwelling on the good things in life that belong to God, and then that's what's coming out of our mouth. If negative things are coming out of my mouth, what am I concentrating on? Negativity. If critical things are coming out of my mouth, what am I concentrating on? Being critical. If I'm talking good things, what am I concentrating on? Good things, wholesome things. It's going to produce good things in life. Colossians, the 4th chapter, verse 6, and this is something that you can't do unless you have God where He belongs in your life. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Let your speech always be with grace. That's not possible for you and I as people. It's possible for us to fake our way through it for a while, but sooner or later there's going to be a situation or a person come along in life that is going to open up the floodgate that is in our life, and we're not going to give them grace. And I think probably every one of us here can relate to that. We're not going to be a graceful person in this situation. And then later, what do? We kick our tails and beat ourselves up because we didn't act the way that we were supposed to act. Well, you were just acting like a person. You were just demonstrating that God wasn't in control of your life. And the only way to get to a place of having God in our life and having the kind of control of our tongue that we can use grace, we can be wholesome, we can be healing, is when God is where He belongs in life, where He is the boss of our life, not us. In Proverbs, the 18th chapter, verse 4, says, "The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook." Well, that's a really pretty verse. I like verses that make your imagination dance. Man is deep waters. Well, if you're at the bottom of a place in deep waters and you have no air, then probably it's not a really good thing. But I don't think that's what this is talking about. I think the deep waters that's being talked about here is the revelation to the world of Jesus Christ in our life. The deep waters that are being talked about here, and the wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. Lou Harmon shared a verse with me. 28th verse of the 17th chapter of Proverbs says, "Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive." So, if you're not wise, don't open your mouth and prove it. Keep it shut. But a wellspring of life. I was trying to impress a girl one time. We were at a retreat up on the Bighorn Mountains at West Lake, and it was getting close to dinner time, and she was going to have to walk all the way around the outside of the lake. And I said, "I'm just going to swim across the lake and go over there, and I'll be there for lunch." She said, "Well, you can go whatever you want. I'm going to walk around here." I'm sure she was thinking I had rocks in my head. So I bailed into the lake and started swimming. Well, you know what happens to cowboy boots when you're in water? They fill up with water. And then you got 10-pound weight on each one of your feet. I like to drown before I got to the other side. That was not a good decision, not a good choice to make. But water that is a wellspring of life flows from us when Jesus Christ is where He belongs in our life. And a man has deep waters inside of him when Jesus Christ is in control of his life and dwells within him. In the book of John, the 6th chapter, 63rd verse, these are the words of Jesus. "It is the Spirit who gives life, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life." Okay, let's go back to where we started. When I asked you, remember the teachers that were a part of your life that shared Jesus Christ with you, and how you thought about them, how you respect them, how you're thankful to the Lord for them. Your life is where it's at today because they got involved in your life. Jesus said that the words that He spoke were spirit and they were life. And do you realize that every time you speak the words of God, the words of salvation, the words of the testimony of your life with someone else, that you're speaking words of the Spirit and words of life? And just like there are people in your life who led you down the salvation road, who maybe took your hand and walked along with you, there's somebody in your life who needs what you have. They need to know of your testimony. They need to know of the words of God, the words of salvation, that one day they can be where you are, be looking back through their life, looking at you, and being thankful to the Lord for you being in their life. I wonder if there's someone in your life who you could teach, who you could share the plan of salvation, the words of the Spirit, and the words of life with. Pray with me, please. God, thank you for loving us, and thank you for teaching us about our tongues that's beyond our ability to control. So we should turn to you and turn our tongues over to you, turn our hearts over to you, that you can have your way with us. I'm praying, Lord, for the work of your Spirit here this day. Teach us the importance and the value that from our tongues can come life, can come healing, and from our tongues can come destruction and harm. Lord, I pray these things now in the name of Jesus. Amen.